Hey guys, this is probably my second attempt to record a composite video on all the shows that came out last week on the CW, the DC shows, and considering I'm so far behind and my schedule is completely a clusterfuck, I'm just gonna do one composite review, like one video where I review Supergirl, Flash, Arrow, and Legends. I'll put timestamps in the description box. You can jump around to whatever one you want to watch. Basically, for this week, I'm only doing this because I want to get caught up on. Because I know I have to do videos for Supergirl and Arrow this week, and also Agents of S.H.I.E.L.D., and also I want to do video reviews on the Lego Batman movie, as well as either John Wick or Split, depending on which one I have time for. So I just figured maybe it would be easier to just do this one review for all four shows. Now for Supergirl, Season 2, Episode 11, The Martian Chronicles, it continues the story point from McGon saying that the White Martians were coming after her, which is why John Jones has been kind of stalking her. Is for her own protection, and they're ambushed by a white Martian called Armek, who just happens to be, who's considered to be her husband by white Martian standards, by their tradition. It was an arranged marriage, and they both McGon and Johns take on Green Martian forms, trying to ambush him, but they're overpowered, and it's not until Supergirl intervenes that he scares them off. And beforehand, she was at the bar trying to talk to Mon-El about, rejecting him and not feeling the same way, but all she did was constantly insult him. So he basically ended up. And so she was trying to plan her Earth birthday, which was her 13 years of being on Earth, but Maggie surprised Alex with concert tickets to Bare Naked Ladies, so she couldn't go to celebrate her Earth birthday, but things go from bad to worse when everybody ends up having to go to the DEO Plaza building, and it turns out that one of the White Martian Armok is infiltrated the building, and Johns decides to put the whole building on lockdown. And even though they're trapped inside with him, it means that Armek is disguised as one of them. And when they're trying to use a Bunsen burner to reveal the imposter, it turns out that Armek is disguised as Wynn. And because of because of the White Martian's telepathy, he's able to use Wynn's technical knowledge to set the nuclear reactor that's powering the building on overload to not only destroy everyone in the building, but to kill everyone within several city blocks. And they're trying to find the real Wynn because they know he has to be in the vicinity to deactivate it. But they also find out that there's a second White Martian in the building, impersonating Alex, who ambushes and attacks Kara. And so once they free Wynn, he has to manually deactivate the nuclear reactor while Kara's fighting the imposter, Alex. Basically, Martian Manhunter and Miss Martian are fighting the Armek and are able to defeat him, and basically the second White Martian almost gets the one-up on Kara until Alex comes in with her gun that she got from Supergirl Lives, the mid-season premiere on Slaver's Moon, to subdue them. But it ends up in kind of this anticlimactic thing in which McGon decides to go back to Mars to try to see if there are other White Martians who share our views and are not genocidal maniacs. And they have this, and they sort of, and Johns and McGon then declare their love for one another, even though there's no making out or anything. It just seems kind of a little bit sudden to me, in my personal opinion. But it seems, but I guess they just did that just because they were they're wrapping up her storyline, I guess, because her actress had booked a pilot. Which is why it seems like we're not going to be seeing her for the rest of the season. And another downside to it is that, well, we'll get to the downside. It turns out that Kara was kind of on bad terms with Wynn, and there was kind of this unresolved tension because she didn't approve of him and James Olsen with their whole vigilanteism, and it just seems like by the end of the whole thing, she was okay with it. And it turns out the reason why she went through such lengths to plan such a big Earth birthday for herself, Kara, and as Alex points out, it was not just because she was feeling lonely and feeling separation anxiety from Alex, but was also because that she was developing feelings for Mon-El in spite of his flaws. The problem is that because she rejected him, she's moved on and started dating Miss Tessmacher from Catco. And so now it's kind of, the roles are pretty much reversed, in which now Kara is the one with the unrequited love, in a sense. So, time will tell how that will play out. I am looking forward to next week's episode, or tomorrow night's episode, in which it's supposed to be titled Luther's, and I guess it's, Lillian Luther's broken out of jail, Lena Luthor's framed, and even though Lena Luthor never became evil in the comics, I just feel like I don't know what else they're going to do with her story arc, and it's just kind of, like I said, again, time will tell how that storyline plays out as well. Now, in The Flash, Season 3, Episode 12, Untouchable, the villain of the week turns out to be a metahuman who was a metahuman during the Flashpoint timeline and got his powers back through alchemy before, Julian was freed from his brainwashing of Savitar. Ironically, he's probably the only metahuman in the show that does not get a nickname, and his name is Clive Yorkin, and he basically turns everything he touches, whether it's people or things, into ash. And basically he wants to get revenge on all the people who incarcerated him in the Flashpoint timeline, which includes Julio Mendez, who turns out to be a musician in post-Flashpoint, which he successfully kills and tips off Barry to what his motives are, and Joe West, who was also involved in his arrest. And Joe West they finally decide to let Joe West. Iris just finally decides to tell Joe West about Barry seeing her get killed by Savitar in the future, and of course he gets flipped out, and he gives like I said, Jesse Martin gives a really good performance of his reaction to being kept in the dark about the whole thing, and it leads to this whole. And what adds insult to injury is that Clive Yorkin decides to, before he goes to CC Jitters, where Barry, the West family, Cecile, and her daughter are all having lunch and basically talking about which Flash is better, and he shows up basically trying to kill Joe West, and only Kid Flash and only Wally's able to, leave the scene and change into his Kid Flash identity and scare off Clive Yorkin. But Clive Yorkin decides to go after Iris as a way to get revenge on Joe West by killing the daughter. And even though she sets off that Meta Alert app on her phone, so that Wally comes to the rescue, it turns out that he makes a stupid decision to tell Clive Yorkin to stop. He doesn't, of course, and for some reason, Wally's not fast enough to stop Clive Yorkin from giving Iris his touch of death. So he has to rush her to Star Labs. Her body's decaying, but basically, and Killer Frost has to reluctantly use her powers Caitlin has to reluctantly use her Killer Frost powers to keep her from dying. And here's the thing that bothers me about the whole thing with Julian Albert is that even though it was played up for last week, which is why I gave it a pass, is the fact that it's like the same arc like every fucking week, which is where he acts like a total jerk to everybody, and then he becomes nice, but then the next following episode, it's like they repeat the same damn arc. And he acts like a jerk to Caitlin to the point where it just feels like, oh, she's, people are just making excuses for their actions, and then they just need to owe up to it. And the same, even though he wasn't in control of Alchemy's actions, and Caitlin takes offense to it when she thinks that, he thinks that she's not owing up to her actions as Killer Frost, to the point where she says that she regrets bringing him onto the team. And then, of course, it comes full circle in which, because she's been using her Killer Frost powers to save Iris for so long, that her alter ego starts to take over and considers letting Iris die. And it takes Julian to be able to talk her down by saying, I was weak, I wasn't able to overcome Savitar's control, but you're the strongest person I know. You can overcome your Killer Frost alter ego, which she ultimately does. And they find, and it turns out when Joe decides to go after another cop because Cisco decides to vibe the Flashpoint timeline, even though he was able to vibe Flashpoint other alternate timelines before, and they treat this as this a new ability. The other cop that was involved in Yorkin's arrest, Joe tracks her down to the Central City train station on its way to, and they both take a train on the way to Star City. Yorkin, knocks over some rubble that causes them to block the path of the train, and so Barry's forced to go onto the train and phase himself, the passengers, and the train itself through the rubble. And he's so weakened by it that it's up to Wally West to cut his hand open and use his blood to neutralize Yorkin's powers and phase through him. Something he was struggling to do throughout the whole episode, but with Barry's encouragement, that he finally manages to do so and neutralizes Yorkin's powers and overcome and knock out Yorkin. And Julian's able to use his blood to synthesize an antidote to save Iris. And Joe says, you know what, we need to be honest with each other, no more secrets, but given that nobody seems to kind of learn the lessons on this show, time will tell whether or not that will stick. And, because of, Iris being the damsel in distress in this episode, I just felt like this was definitely a major step down from the last week's episode, although I did like the tease at the end of the episode where while Wally was practicing phasing, that Jesse Quick showed up from Earth 2 saying that her dad was captured by Gorilla Grodd and that he was in Gorilla City, which means that which is going to lead to the two-parter starting on the 21st, in which Barry and company have to go to Gorilla City to rescue Harry, and which probably may or may not lead to the confrontation between Grodd and Savitar. Now in Season 5, Episode 12 of Arrow, Bratva, turns out General Walker, the man responsible for framing Diggle, has escaped from U.S. custody and flee to Russia, trying to sell a nuclear bomb to Markovian terrorists. Now, because the U.S. military and Arcus can't touch the guy on foreign soil without causing an international incident, Team Arrow decides they're the ones that are going to go to Russia and try to apprehend him. And Oliver gets in contact with Anatoly, the man from the flashbacks, who's a member of the Bratva, but the Bratva are pissed at him because of the fact that Alexei Leonov, who is basically Oliver's contact with the Bratva back in seasons 1 and 2, got killed by Slade Wilson, and they never forgave him for it, and they refuse to help him unless they do a favor for him, and re-swears his oath or allegiance to the Bratva. So he reluctantly has to go to Anatoly and do a favor for him, which is like beat up an old a business rival. along with Dinah, and she doesn't know what's going on until Oliver fesses up to, having to go to talk to Anatoly and kind of make a whole deal with the devil sort of situation. And he worries about how he's corrupting the people around him with, John, crossing a line in which when they capture one of Walker's henchmen, Oliver wants to resort to more psychological torture in order to get him to break, but Diggle is so hell-bent on getting revenge on Walker that he just beats the henchman to a bloody pulp like he's a literal punching bag. And Felicity, using the Pandora flash drive she got last week, is able to use the information to blackmail the manufacturer of a burner phone that General Walker was using to, I guess, help give up his location, and under the threat that he'll expose his criminal activity to, I guess, the authorities, to his enemies, the manufacturer, that it'll put his family in danger, even though it's a total bluff. But it kind of raises eyebrows for Rory Regan, Ragman, and realizes that she's kind of going down a dark path. And it takes a pep talk from Dinah saying that you affect the people in your life. That's an inevitability, but it doesn't mean that you can't. But Prometheus has you fixated on what's wrong with you. You don't focus on what's right with you. They'll listen to you. You can talk your friends down, and that your past can be as a part of you. You can't change that, but that Oliver, it doesn't have to be an anchor for Oliver. And it does feature some flashbacks, which I did forget to mention last week. Featured Talia al Ghul, and basically being the only member of the League of Assassins who, to play judge, jury, and executioner. And it just seems like that was always an informed attribute up to this point, because it just seemed like the League of Assassins would do nothing in present day besides just pester Oliver and company. But she's basically been training Oliver to become the Hood and act and basically be active in Russia, from taking down human traffickers in last week's episode to in this week's episode, taking down manufacturers of the Vertigo drug, which Oliver killed in year 3 of the flashbacks, like the dealer, Thea's dealer, and thinking that it would just fix the problem, but it turns out it didn't. But anyway, he's able to talk. He's able to talk John and Diggle and Felicity down, saying that he doesn't want to be a bad influence on them, but they say that they're with him no matter what. And with the help of the Bratva and Black and Dinah, they're able to take out the Markovian terrorists. And Rory, using his rags, is able to contain the blast of the nuclear bomb when they're not able to defuse it. And John, even though Walker goads him into trying to shoot him in the same way that Andy did when he threatened his family, he decides to bring him to justice. But because of the effects of the nuclear blast on the rags, Rory decides he has to leave the team and find a way to repower the rags. And Renee stays behind as an advisor to Quentin Lands after he gets out of rehab, and asks him all these difficult questions that are kind of like button pushers, because he feels like Suzanne Williams is going to ask him about Laurel's death and how that affected him, and that pisses him off, and they eventually reconcile. And Renee reveals that when Quentin was a beat cop, that he's the one who set him off on the right path. After, instead of arresting him for graffiti, Quentin just told them that he can be better than what he is, and that's why it's part of the reason why he became a vigilante, or at least tried to better himself. Quentin didn't remember the encounter, but it did mean a lot to Renee. But Quentin was still touched by being able to have an impact on him, which I guess is going to be explored more in next week's episode, because the trailer didn't reveal anything, but the synopsis revealed that an incident at City Hall triggered some traumatic events for Renee, and apparently supposed to get more of his backstory of how he went from being a family man to becoming the vigilante he is, known as Wild Dog. For Legends of Tomorrow, Season 2, Episode 11, Turncoat, Rip has assassinated George Washington, has provided 21st century assault rifles to the British Army as part of a trap to lure the Legends to come back in time to Christmas Eve of 1776, before George Washington and the American Revolutionaries crossed their Delaware. And it leads to a number of things where it turns out that this is what I actually like Rip more as a villain than a hero or part of the team, because he seems like more competent as a villain, to the point where he's able to use an EMP to neutralize the splicer that allows Jax and Martin Stein to merge into Firestorm. It takes out it basically shuts down the Wave Rider. It shuts down Ray Palmer's suit, so he's stuck in a miniaturized form. And so it's why when Rip confronts the team and shoots Sarah, that they're not able to use the technology of the Wave Rider to automatically heal her. And so it leads to a whole incident in which Mick and George Washington are held captive by the British Army. Nate and Amaya have to go after them, but they get attacked. Nate falls into a river, and after being rescued, Amaya has to use skin-to-skin contact to keep the hypothermia from killing him, which leads to them resolving some sexual tension between the two of them, which they do sleep together in the tent. But luckily, they said it's just for fun, as Nate tells him that's just a 21st century thing. It doesn't have to go further than that. And I'm glad, because I don't know, I'm sick of the argument saying that, well, it's the CW, what do you expect? I expect that if they're going to do ships, it happens naturally, it's not shoehorned or forced, and it's not a detriment to the plot. If it's to the extent that it was in Season 4 of Arrow. I'm glad they subverted that trope. And Mick has a talk with George Washington, saying that, you know, when Washington thinks that's being honorable, being treated as a prisoner of war is going to get them through this, Mick says Americans are misfits and outcasts. It's all about fighting dirty, and that's how they're able to escape. And Rip is able to have the British Army sneak onto the Wave Rider and have this whole cat and mouse game with Jax, to the point where even though Stein's able to get the bullet out of Sarah and stitch her up, Rip has Sarah in a chokehold and forces Jax to reveal where their piece of the Spear of Destiny is, which he does, but he still ends up snapping Sarah's neck, killing her. And because her brainwaves are still active, and because Ray, after being chased through the ventilation system of the ship by a rat and being able to activate the backup power on the Wave Rider, Gideon comes back online and heals Sarah and prevents Jax from killing Rip in cold blood, which it was still kind of stupid, because I feel like Jax could have at least shot Rip to wound him, because now it's just like he ends up running off with a piece of the Spear of Destiny to get back to Thawne and the rest of the Legion. But it does lead to like a funny moment in which, because of the friendship with between Mick and Washington, is that there is a statue in Mick's honor, in which he is now considered a founding father of the United States. And I don't know, even though it's in February and they went back in time to Christmas Eve of 1776, they end up celebrating Christmas on the Wave Rider. And I guess Ray gets Mick a rat for him, the same rat that was chasing him when he was shrunk. And yeah, it was just in my opinion, it was just another solid episode and another solid season. So, what do you guys think was the strongest episode of which show do you think had the strongest episode this past week? Leave your thoughts in the comments down below. I will do reviews on Agents of S.H.I.E.L.D. this week's Supergirl and Arrow, and hopefully, like I said, the other two movies that I mentioned before earlier in the video. Hope you enjoyed this video and you have a good night. Take care.